Hello and welcome back, everyone. Today we are here to talk about what I consider to be one of Steven Spielberg's most visually engaging films. A movie that introduced all of us to Rufio and the term Bangarang. That's right, today we are talking about 1991's Hook, starring Robin Williams, Dustin Hoffman, Bob Hoskins, Julia Roberts, and Dante Basco. When Hook was released in December of 1991, it debuted to mixed to negative reviews, which I think can be a surprise to people that grew up in the 90s and had this movie on VHS. Because as a kid completely detached from the world of film criticism, aside from occasionally watching like Siskel and Ebert or whatever, I personally had no idea that Hook was not a critically acclaimed film until I was well into adulthood. But I think there are a lot of people that grew up with this movie the same way that I did, and over the last couple of decades, it feels like Hook has been re-evaluated as an absolute classic, and I don't just mean a classic in Spielberg's filmography, but a classic in general. But before we dive too deep into this movie's legacy and everything that makes it awesome, let's go back to the early 80s and talk about how Hook came to be. I don't want to get too deep into therapizing Steven Spielberg in this video, so I'll just say this. His mom read Peter Pan to him a lot as a kid, and Spielberg self-identified as having Peter Pan syndrome as early as 1985. And if you want to know more about how Spielberg's parents messed him up, just go watch The Fabelmans. But with that said, Spielberg began developing a remake of the 1953 animated Peter Pan film that Disney had made starting in the early 80s. Apparently there were very early talks to have Michael Jackson star as Peter Pan in this movie, but that quickly fell apart, and I found two different stories online when researching this. Either Jackson didn't want to play an adult Peter Pan, or Spielberg told Jackson about the movie and Jackson just assumed he wanted him to star in it. And honestly, both stories sound completely plausible to me. Throughout all of the 1980s, it seems like Spielberg was batting around the idea of making a Peter Pan movie. And in 1985, Paramount hired James V. Hart to write the first draft of the script, but then Spielberg dropped out after the birth of his first son, so director Nick Castle was brought on board to work on the movie for the next 4 years. Now, Nick Castle you may know as the director of movies like The Last Starfighter, Dennis the Menace, and Major Payne, or you may know him from his work with John Carpenter, having played the Shape in several scenes from the original Halloween, as well as writing Escape from New York. So Castle, Hart, and Hoffman spent the better part of 4 years developing this movie, as Spielberg moved into being a full-time dad and dropped out of directing the movie. And in 1989, the movie was moved from Paramount to TriStar, and Robin Williams joined to play Peter Pan. However, he and Dustin Hoffman apparently clashed with Castle on several creative aspects, so he was fired and Spielberg was brought back on board to direct. But don't feel too bad for my boy Nick Castle. He got $500,000 not to direct this movie, so not a bad deal if you ask me. So after Spielberg rejoined the project, he hired Malia Scotch-Marmo to rewrite the script and Carrie Fisher to do punch-ups, though her work was primarily on Tinkerbell's dialogue. And in February of 1989, Hook went into production across 9 sound stages on Sony's lot. And I feel like this is the last movie we ever really hear about where Spielberg goes over on production, which is something he was really known for early in his career, before realizing he didn't want that to be his reputation and delivered Raiders of the Lost Ark on time and under budget. However, Hook was not under budget. Set at an initial budget of $48 million, it ballooned all the way to $80 million before filming was complete. And I think Spielberg takes on a lot of the blame for why Hook didn't quite work. Now, this movie was not a failure by any means. It grossed $300 million worldwide, but when you hear Spielberg talk about this movie in interviews, there's always a sense of regret there. And I think a large part of that is that John Williams wrote 8 songs with lyricist Leslie Bricusse because originally Hook was supposed to be a musical, and I think you can really tell, but more on that later. I bring this up because I think Spielberg honestly just kind of chickened out on making a musical and didn't properly have time to really rework the movie to not feel like a musical. Well, that and he was constantly entertaining guests on set because people wanted to come see these massive Neverland sets that had been built for the movie. Just for fun, here's a long list of people confirmed to have visited the set of Hook in 1991. Michelle Pfeiffer, Tom Cruise, Demi Moore, Warren Beatty, Annette Bening, Mel Gibson, Prince, and Jordan's Queen of North. That's right, 2 members of royalty visited the set, and yes, I am counting Prince as royalty. But it sounds like the main problem here is that Spielberg was a little overconfident going into the movie before realizing he didn't quite have the handle on it that he thought he did. And it sounds like the biggest problems during production was just the overall scale of this movie. There were so many extras and sets, and there was also apparently some tension between Spielberg and Julia Roberts, and just overall, like I said, when you hear Spielberg talk about this movie, it's just not one he looks back on fondly, even though this is where he and Robin Williams met and became fast friends. There's actually a really beautiful story that Spielberg's told about the day that Robin Williams died. He sat down and tried to watch Hook for the first time since it was released, and he had to turn it off an hour in because he couldn't stop crying. Honestly, I get it. So production on Hook wrapped in June of 91, 4 weeks after it was initially supposed to wrap, and then only had 6-ish months for all of post-production, which is a pretty insane timeline if you ask me. I know it sounds like a lot of time, but there is just so much to do after you finish filming. Like, production really is only a small part of making a movie. Also, before we go any further, here is your one and only spoiler warning for a movie that came out almost 35 years ago. I'll be covering the entire movie's plot in this video. Okay, moving on. But that being said, I think this movie more or less still works. The basic premise of Hook boils down to one simple question posed by James V. Hart's son. What if Peter Pan grew up? And in the film, we follow Peter Banning, a workaholic who constantly ignores his family, particularly his children, in favor of work and being a responsible adult. And this is all communicated in the most 90s way possible because you see Peter is always on his cell phone, which is a hallmark of bad parenting in 90s movies. I do wonder if this trope would even work for younger kids today. If you're watching this video and you have kids that you've shown Hook to, let me know what they thought in the comments. And look, I'm going to kind of breeze past this first section of the movie set in the real world because I think it's kind of boring and the worst part of the movie. Okay, the movie opens with the Banning family, Peter, Moira, and Jack, watching Peter and Moira's daughter Maggie star in a play which is Peter Pan. And I guess let's get this out of the way as well. In the movie's lore, the character of Peter Pan as we know him exists. J.M. Barrie wrote a book called Peter and Wendy, and it was a big hit that inspired a well-known play. Though we don't learn if there were ever any film adaptations, but I digress. So yes, in the movie Hook, Peter Pan exists as a real and a fictional character. Okay, so this opening play is adorable, and then we get hit with the opposite of a Save the Cat moment, where Peter answers a call on his phone in the middle of the play. Really, this opening section is short, but it does a great job of establishing Peter as a bad dad who prioritizes his family second over work. Always, no matter what. And I like how he keeps saying,
"My word is my bond."
And then he immediately breaks every single promise he makes because, again, he's a bad dad. And then, thank God, we get out of the US pretty much right away, and I've always loved this sequence on the plane. Basically, Peter's son, Jack, played by Charlie Korsmo, is pissed at him for missing his baseball game and spends the entire flight messing with his dad to get back at him. And like, this is a pretty short sequence, but I just love how Korsmo plays Jack. He's such a little turd. Like, he's super self-conscious and awkward, but he's got that little turd energy that only a 12-year-old can give you authentically. Like, even when Jack meets Granny Wendy, he can't help but start his sentence with,
"I'm supposed to tell you about..."
It's incredible. While we're in England, we get a lot of small, wonderful moments like that. I've also always loved this moment.
Remember, you're in England, land of good manners. Uncle Toodles.
It's snowing!
And I gotta talk about Dame Maggie Smith real quick. First of all, she's great in this movie. Second of all, this old age makeup is on another level. Like, she looks almost identical here to how Maggie Smith actually looked in her later years. It's just really, really incredible stuff. Okay, jumping ahead just a bit, but Peter and Moira's kids are kidnapped, and Peter's gotta go to Neverland to save them, which Granny Wendy tries to tell him, but he won't listen. So then Tinkerbell shows up, beats him up, and takes him against his will. And fun fact, this couple kissing on the bridge is George Lucas and Carrie Fisher. And for me, this is where the movie really starts, which is ironic because Spielberg apparently is the opposite and likes these opening 40 minutes and the epilogue, but not the stuff in Neverland. But whatever, he's entitled to his incorrect opinion, I suppose. All right, let's talk about these Neverland sets because holy shit, they look incredible. Shout out to set decorator Garrett Lewis and production designer Norman Garwood, both of whom were nominated for Oscars for Hook, but lost to Warren Beatty's Bugsy. I haven't ever seen Bugsy, so I'll reserve judgment on if they should have won or not. Hey everyone, Future Brandon here. I realized while editing this that I didn't talk about Dean Cundey or his cinematography at all and really just focused more on the set design and art direction, but I just want to say for the record that Cundey did an incredible job and I love everything about how this movie looks. But seriously, I just love these sets and they just don't make movies like this anymore. If this movie were made today, it would be shot almost completely on a green screen and it would be worse for it. Something about a practical set just makes the world feel more real and lived in. Even in a heightened reality like this where we have these insane, completely unrealistic matte paintings backing it all up, because the imagery is physically present for the actors to see and feel. It makes the world feel real. I'll take something real that people physically made with their hands over a CG world any day. And for the record, that is not me knocking on CG artists. They are overworked and underpaid and deserve to be unionized so these corporations stop screwing them over. Okay, where was I? Oh, right. Neverland. This entire first sequence in Neverland is so much fun. I feel like when I think about this movie, this is always one of the first sequences I think about because almost every second we spend in Pirate Town is memorable. From Peter waking up and Jimmy Buffett trying to steal his shoes, to the sharpening of Hook's hook and the parade to bring it to him. And I just love Dustin Hoffman's intro as Hook. He feels so menacing right away, but like in a fun way, in the way that Captain Hook should feel. Plus, I really like that Bob Hoskins references Good Morning Vietnam here. I just think it's kind of an adorable callback to Robin's early career. And then we get Glenn Close's amazing cameo as Gutless, where she gets thrown into the boo box for doubting Captain Hook. I love this scene. Which leads to Peter's big failure of trying to save his kids. And I love how the sequence starts out with him being angry and threatening to sue, and then he's embarrassed because he has to admit that he's scared of heights. And oh hey look, it's David Crosby. And then of course, pure fear takes over as he's climbing the pole, and then that total look of failure that spreads through his entire body when he realizes he can't do it. He can't do what is necessary to save his kids. Luckily, Tinkerbell is there to negotiate with Hook for him, and we get 3 days to turn boring workaholic Peter Banning into a Peter Pan that can fight, fly, and crow. So then, after a short little travel montage of Peter making his way through Neverland, we get to the moment that I think we've all been waiting for. The Lost Boys, and of course, the one and only Rufio. And I love all of the Lost Boys and their silly names and the way they chase Peter around when he first gets there and mock him relentlessly as they play around with him. It's honestly a great scene because it shows what playing is to the Lost Boys and how far away Peter is from understanding the games that the Lost Boys play. He's genuinely scared for his life here, which, I think makes sense. I probably would be too. Okay, let's just talk about Rufio. Played by Dante Bosco, Rufio is a Lost Boy that was created specifically for Hook. He doesn't appear in any other Peter Pan stories outside of Hook, as far as I can tell, and Rufio is hands down one of the coolest and most important characters of 90s kids movies. If you didn't love Rufio as a kid, you're a liar and you know it. And I feel like when people bring up Hook as a movie, aside from the two main characters, Rufio gets talked about the most. I mean, he just shows up cool as hell on a sail-powered skateboard looking like an extra from the Road Warrior and carrying a badass golden sword. I mean, come on, what's not to love here? Okay, real quick, while I'm on the topic of Dante Bosco and Rufio, I'm currently in the process of watching Avatar: The Last Airbender for the first time ever, and I'm about to finish it. Like, quite literally at the time of me writing this, my wife and I are planning on watching the finale later today. I gotta say, it's a pretty good show, and I feel like I have a lot to say about it, so keep your eyes out for a video on Avatar: The Last Airbender next Thursday. Okay, back to Hook. Honestly, I could do a whole video on just the Lost Boys, but I'm gonna try and keep it quick because this video is already way too long. Like I said, I love the introduction of Rufio, and I love him drawing a literal line in the sand and telling the Lost Boys to choose. They stay on one side, that means they think Peter is the real Pan, and if they come to Rufio's side, they think he's a poser. And I love that Robin Williams is the first one over to Rufio's side. Like, yeah, I'm obviously not Peter Pan. And of course, this moment is one of my favorites in the entire movie. I mean, it sums up in one line the entire point of this movie.
Oh, there you are, Peter.
Looking past your own age to find your inner child, and this moment is just pure Spielberg movie magic. And then the training sequence is just incredible. I love the way the Lost Boys are just berating him nonstop for being old and fat in ways that only kids can do, and I legitimately get their little cheers stuck in my head every time I watch this movie. At the same time, Hook is spiraling over not getting to have his war with Peter Pan, even threatening to unalive himself, and I just love the way Hoffman and Hoskins played Hook and Smee like an old married couple. Apparently, these two decided early on that Hook and Smee were secretly gay. Even though there's nothing in the script about it, it's still kind of obvious and hilarious. I mean, Smee literally kisses Hook here. And anyway, Smee has the brilliant idea to try and turn Peter's kids against him and love Hook instead. And I like how Maggie, played by Amber Scott, immediately sees through the bullshit. And I also like how she freaks out when Smee gives her an F. While Maggie might not fall for Hook's shenanigans, Jack is just mad enough at his dad to kind of be overtaken by the magic of Neverland and Hook as a father figure. And then we cut back to Peter and the Lost Boys for what I think is maybe the best scene in the entire movie, the food fight. First of all, I love how Robin Williams plays his disappointment when all the food is uncovered and revealed to be imaginary, and how he kind of mimics what he sees the other Lost Boys eating. The insult battle between Peter and Rufio is iconic, and I love how Peter answers when asked what a paramecium is. It's just awesome. And then of course, the moment when Peter flicks the food at Rufio's face, and we see that all of the containers on the table now have food in them. Peter's learning how to use use his imagination again. And remember what I said about pure Spielberg movie magic a minute ago? Yeah, that's this moment as well. As is Peter's scene with Thudbutt afterward. God, I love Thudbutt. Where Thudbutt gives Peter Toodles his marbles and tells Peter about his mother. It's just a really beautiful scene. And then we get Maggie's song, and if you don't like the song Maggie sings, you're dead inside. There, I said it. The next day, Peter and the Lost Boys sneak into Pirate Town and find a baseball game going on where Jack is the star player. And look, this is a really important scene for Peter's character development. This is where Peter realizes that Hook is cheering on Jack at a baseball game more in this moment than Peter ever has, and it leads him down a path of self-doubt that leads to him finally discovering that he is in fact Peter Pan and he can fly. And I always remember as a kid, this was my least favorite part of the movie, even more so than the opening like 30-40 minutes in the real world. Something about it always just kind of felt weird and boring to me, and now that I'm an adult, I think it's just sloppily paced as a sequence and a little sloppily written, but more on that in a little bit. So Peter finds his pan, and now it's time to go save Peter's kids, and the entire war with Captain Hook is again just pure Spielberg movie magic from start to finish. From Peter's dramatic entrance to Jack asking Hook who that is, it's great. And I haven't even talked about John Williams' score for this movie at all yet, have I? I mean, what is there even to say about it? It's a John Williams score, and for me, it's one of his most memorable, up there with Raiders and Star Wars. It just fits the mood of the movie so well and makes it feel so adventurous and magic. And this is another sequence that I could spend an entire video talking about. I mean, I could probably do an entire video on just the Lost Boys' gadgets that they use. I mean, come on, this egg machine gun uses a live chicken as the clip. It's pretty sick. Like I said, could do an entire video on just this sequence, but let's just stick with the main hits. I love the way Peter tells Jack how he found his happy thought and how he found his memories. It's just so sweet. What I don't love is the death of Rufio. Now, it works for the story. It ups the stakes and makes everything that much more realistic. Captain Hook is no longer just a silly, evil little man. He's a child murderer. He killed Rufio in cold blood, and earlier we hear him talking about killing other Lost Boys. This just makes it all feel more real, and I've always loved the end of Captain Hook. From the way Peter takes him down and flips off his wig, to him trying to stab Peter in the back, and of course, the way the crocodile kinda sorta comes alive to finally eat Hook. For me, it's one of the all-time great demises of a villain. He's there and then he's gone and the world is better for it. And if you don't get misty when Peter decides who's going to be the new leader of the Lost Boys, you're either a liar or again, you're dead inside. Apparently none of the kids knew who Peter was going to give the sword to, only Spielberg and Robbins knew, because they wanted the genuine reaction from the kid chosen. And of course, my boy Thudbutt is chosen, because how could he not be? And I just love the look on his face, and let's just give a quick shout out to Rashawn Hammond, who plays Thudbutt. He was only 9 when they filmed this movie, and he fully owns his scenes next to Robin Williams, and that is truly impressive. He never went on to do much acting after this, but he really nailed this role. And finally, we get our epilogue back in England with Moira and Wendy finding the kids in their bed, and Peter finding himself on the ground outside, and hey, Smee is here for some reason. And honestly, this entire ending feels a little It's a Wonderful Life to me. It's a lot of crying and yelling about being happy and thankful for your life and that you're not going to waste it anymore. And I love how Toodles gets his marbles back and gets to fly one more time. I think it's a solid way to end this movie. So does Hook hold up in 2025? Honestly, yes and no. I think there are a lot of things to love about this movie. Like I said, there are multiple sequences in this movie that I could spend an entire video dissecting, and they're all really wonderful sequences. But also this movie is pretty poorly paced and a little sloppy in the writing. For example, it takes a full 35 minutes for us to just get to Neverland. And I mentioned earlier that I'm not a big fan of this movie's opening, and I think every time I rewatch this movie, I like the opening just a little bit less. It does a great job of setting up Peter and his dynamic with his family, but also the whole time I can't help but thinking, when do we get to Neverland? It's interesting to me that it's these early scenes that Spielberg likes the most, because I think they're the least Spielbergy moments in the entire movie. And then I have one major complaint about this movie's screenplay. In Peter's flashback, as he's recovering his memories, we learn that he ran away from home as an infant in a stroller. First of all, what? As an infant, Peter Pan had the cognitive abilities to not only understand speech, but understand the context of what it means to grow up. So he just willed his stroller away. But the biggest problem with this moment is if you stop growing up once you're in Neverland, how did Peter Pan ever even become a kid if he was brought there as an infant? Why wouldn't you just make Peter Pan 10 when he runs away from home? It solves both of the problems I've just outlined above. But I think this movie's biggest problem is that it isn't a musical. And I know, some of you may come at me in the comments because you hate musicals or whatever. But next time you watch this movie, try thinking about it as a musical. Because there are so many moments where it feels like, well, obviously there should be a song here, or moments where it feels like a song should be ending. And I get it, I really do. He just didn't have the confidence yet to try and pull a musical off. But but because he chickened out, what we're left with is a movie that functions as a classic Hollywood musical in almost every single way, except for the fact that aside from Maggie, there aren't any characters singing their feelings and dancing away. But even me having these complaints, I would still put this in the upper echelon of Spielberg's filmography. It's not Jaws or Indiana Jones or Jurassic Park, but for me, it's just right below them. So, almost 35 years later, what is Hook's legacy? Well, I think that the initial mixed critical reception this movie got has completely melted away, and it's now remembered as a classic for an entire generation of kids who grew up watching it on repeat and yelling Bangarang. I mean, there was even a decent pop-punk band from California called Rufio, and according to my research, there have been a couple bands going by the name Bangarang over the years, but the one I remember was from Pennsylvania. And again, from what I remember, they were pretty good. Also, just a quick side note, I learned while doing research for this video that Bangarang is actually a Jamaican word meaning to cause mischief and or chaos, so it's a perfect thing for the Lost Boys to always be yelling all the time. But I think overall, the legacy of Hook is that it's one of those kids movies that if you saw it at the right age and were immune to film criticisms of the time, you probably also love it and think it's a masterpiece. Though I would be curious how many of you out there are like me and think that it's a classic despite its many flaws. For me, the enduring legacy of Hook is both the way it looks. I mean, I'm just obsessed with these sets and matte paintings, and it's Robin Williams. When he passed away in 2014, the first thing I did when I got home that day was sit down and watch Hook, and much like Papa Spielberg, I sobbed through the whole thing while watching it. Obviously, I didn't know Robin Williams. He never had an effect on me personally as a human being, but his presence in the movies I saw him in always brought me a lot of comfort. As a kid, it felt like he was one of the only actors out there that could speak to the nature of an inner child without feeling like he was talking down to his audience. I mean, go rewatch Aladdin if you want the perfect examples of this. Dude is dropping references left and right that flew over all of our heads at the time, but it's made going back and revisiting it as an adult that much more fun, and again, helped me realize that Robin didn't talk down to his audience, because he knew he was entertaining enough that even if we didn't get the joke, we still got him. But really, I just love the way Robin Williams plays Peter Pan throughout this movie. As Peter Banning, he's an insufferable absentee father, and this carries all the way up until he gets into the insult battle with Rufio. That is the first moment in the entire movie where Pan starts to come through, and really all of his scenes with the Lost Boys 2 are just fantastic and make me feel warm and fuzzy on the inside. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. Is Hook a masterpiece? Is it a flawed masterpiece? Do you hate it? Do you love it? If you do, let me know why. This is Brandon from Born to Rant signing off, and if you made it this far into the video, thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We release new videos covering all things nerd culture every Thursday morning at 7 a.m. And again, keep your eyes peeled for that Avatar video coming next week. Okay, bye-bye.